Let me begin calmly, with an idea that sounds almost absurd at first. We say light moves, we picture it racing through space, bouncing off mirrors, streaming from stars. But pause for a moment, ask a quieter question. What if light does not move at all? Imagine stripping motion down to its most basic meaning. Motion means change with time. Something is here, then later it is there. A clock ticks, a distance is crossed. Now ask yourself this. For light itself, where is the clock? I want you to imagine riding alongside a beam of light, not chasing it, not watching it from Earth, riding with it. What would you see? This question sounds simple, but it carries a strange tension, because every attempt to answer it quietly breaks something we believe we understand. Here is the first unsettling thought. For light, there is no passage of time. From the light's own perspective, if such a perspective can even exist, emission and absorption happen together, not quickly, not slowly, together. Zero time passes. Does that still sound like motion? Let me slow this down. When we say light takes 8 minutes to reach us from the sun, that is our time, our clocks, our waiting. But light does not wait. There is no ticking inside a photon, no internal rhythm marking its journey. The entire path collapses into a single event. So what then is distance? Distance is space measured over time, but if no time passes, how can distance mean anything at all? This is where our everyday intuition begins to slip. We are used to imagining motion as something happening within time. Light refuses to play by that rule. Think about this differently. A stone moves through space and time. You can slow it down, you can speed it up, you can bring it to rest. Light does none of these things. It never speeds up, it never slows down, it never rests. It simply exists along a path. Now, ask a sharper question. If something cannot be at rest, is it really moving? Or is motion the wrong word entirely? Perhaps light is not an object traveling through space. Perhaps it is a connection between events. Imagine space and time as a vast map. Most objects trace winding paths across this map, gradually drifting from one moment to the next. Light traces a different kind of path, a path with no length in time, a path that cuts straight through the map without aging. This is not poetry, it is geometry. Light follows the structure of space-time itself, and that structure allows something remarkable. Paths where time simply does not pass. Along those paths, the idea of motion loses its meaning. Let me press on this gently. We often say the speed of light is constant, but constant compared to what? Compared to time, compared to distance. But light does not experience either in the way we do. So perhaps speed is something we assign to light, not something light possesses. Here is a useful image. Think of a movie, film stretched out on a table. Every frame exists at once. The characters inside the film think they are moving, but from outside, nothing moves at all. Light is like a line drawn across the entire film in one stroke. From our perspective, that line crosses frame after frame. From the line's perspective, there are no frames, only the complete drawing. Is that motion, or is it structure? This idea forces a shift. Instead of asking how fast light moves, we ask how space-time is shaped so that light connects events the way it does. The mystery is no longer about light racing. It is about geometry allowing timeless paths. Now let me unsettle this further. If light does not experience time, then it does not experience change. And if it does not experience change, then concepts like before and after lose meaning. Cause and effect blur, lull the path of light. This does not mean causality disappears. It means causality is arranged differently than we instinctively imagine. Events linked by light are stitched together in space-time, not separated by an internal clock carried by the light itself. Pause here. Feel how far this is from everyday thinking. We are not saying light is frozen. We are saying light lives outside the flow that defines freezing and motion in the first place. So what is moving then? When we see light travel across a room, what changes? We change. Our clocks change. Our detectors change. Light simply marks relationships between those changes. Think of lightning and thunder. You see the flash, then later hear the sound. The delay tells you distance, but the flash itself does not wait. The waiting happens in you. This is why attempts to define a frame of reference moving with light fail. There is no valid way to sit still with something that does not experience time. The idea of sharing a moment with light collapses under its own weight. And now a deeper curiosity emerges. If light does not move through time, and matter does, then matter and light inhabit space-time differently. Matter ages. Light does not. Matter accumulates history. Light connects history. This hints at something profound. Perhaps the universe is not fundamentally made of things moving through time, but of relationships laid out across space-time. Light is the simplest expression of that structure. Let me turn the question around. Instead of asking why light doesn't move, ask why we ever thought it did. The answer lies in our habit of projecting our own experience onto everything else. We move, we age, we wait. So we imagine everything else does too. But light exposes the limit of that projection. It shows us a boundary where everyday language breaks, where motion becomes an approximation, where time becomes optional. Now imagine standing at the edge of this idea, looking inward. If light does not move, then what we call the present moment stretches along every light path that reaches us. The now is not a slice, it is a web. And if that is true, then the universe is far more interconnected than our instincts suggest. Events separated by vast distances are woven together by paths that do not age, paths that simply are. Hold that thought, because once you accept that light does not move in the way we think, you are forced to reconsider what motion really means, what time really is, and whether the flow we feel is a feature of the universe or a feature of us. And if you follow that thread just a little further, you begin to notice that the idea of time passing may itself be emerging from something far more subtle, something that only becomes visible when you stop thinking of light as moving and start seeing it as the boundary where motion itself quietly dissolves into a deeper structure that does not care about flow at all. Let me take you one step further into that structure. If light traces paths where time does not pass, then those paths form the skeleton of space-time. Everything else hangs from them. Matter, clocks, memories, all of it exists in relation to these timeless connections. This is a strange inversion. We usually think matter is primary and light is something it emits. But from this angle, light defines what it even means for events to be connected. Without light-like paths, there is no notion of cause reaching effect. Ask yourself this quietly. How do you know something happened far away? Because light arrived, not because time flowed there, but because a connection reached you. Light is not a traveler bringing news. It is the rule that allows news to exist. Now consider a clock. Any clock. It works by change. A pendulum swings, an atom vibrates, time is counted by motion. Light refuses all of this. It carries no internal change to count, so it cannot carry time with it. This means something subtle. When light leaves a distant galaxy billions of years ago and reaches your eye tonight, the billions of years belong entirely to the galaxy and to you, not to the light. The light spans that fissures without owning any of it. Think of it like a bridge that does not age while cities on both sides rise and fall. The bridge is not old or young. It simply connects. This perspective reshapes how we think about the universe expanding. Space stretches, galaxies drift apart, light still links them. But the stretching does not happen to light. It happens to the space between events that light. So when we say light is slowed by gravity or redshifted by expansion, what is really happening? Is light changing, or are the clocks and rulers we use to describe it changing? Here is the quiet answer. Light remains faithful to the geometry. It follows the rules perfectly. It is our interpretation, rooted in aging clocks, that translates those rules into speeds and delays. Now, imagine a universe with no matter at all, no atoms, no clocks, only space-time and light-like paths. Would time exist there without something to age, without something to change? The idea of time loses its anchor. This suggests that time is not a backdrop. It is a bookkeeping system created by matter. Light shows us the bookkeeping's limits. Let me ask another careful question. If light does not experience time, then can it experience causality? Does one event cause another along a light path, or are they simply linked? From our perspective, cause comes before effect. From light's perspective, there is no before. So causality is not something light feels. It is something we infer when we arrange events along our own time. This does not break physics. It clarifies it. Causality lives in space-time as a whole, not inside the messenger. Now let your intuition rest for a moment, and notice what this implies about the present. We usually imagine the present as a thin slice moving forward, but light ignores that slicing. It connects what we call past and present without caring which is which. So perhaps the present is not a moving edge. Perhaps it is a region defined by connections, a network of events tied together by light-like relationships. This reframes simultaneity. Events that seem simultaneous to us are not special to light. What matters is whether they can be connected without time passing. If that sounds abstract, try a simple thought experiment. Close your eyes and imagine a flash of light, emitted and absorbed. From emission to absorption, no time passes for the light. So, in a sense, those two events are one. Now, multiply that across the universe. Everywhere light travels, it stitches distant events into single structures. The universe becomes less like a sequence and more like a tapestry. This is why attempts to imagine what light sees fail. Seeing requires change. Seeing requires time. Light cannot watch the universe unfold. It does not unfold for light. Instead, light defines the boundaries of unfolding for everything else. Now notice how this idea sneaks into other corners of physics. When we talk about horizons, limits, beyond which information cannot reach us, we are really talking about where light-like connections end. Horizons are not laws. They are failures of connection. Black holes are extreme examples. Inside, light paths bend so severely that they no longer lead outward. Time still passes for matter falling in, but light itself remains timeless, even as its allowed paths shrink. This makes black holes feel less like objects, and more like regions where the structure of connection changes, where some events can no longer be stitched to others. And once again, light is not struggling or slowing. It is obeying geometry. Let me gently push toward a deeper implication. If light defines the structure of spacetime, and spacetime defines what motion and time mean, then light is not something inside the universe. It is part of how the universe is organized. This is why its speed is the same for everyone. Not because light is stubborn, but because the geometry. Imagine trying to tilt a ruler to make its length change. You cannot. The ruler defines length. Light defines spacetime intervals. Seen this way, asking why light does not move is like asking why a shadow does not age. The question assumes the wrong category. Light is not a thing progressing through moments. It is the boundary condition that gives moments meaning. Now pause here, because this is the pivot. If time emerges from matter and light defines timeless connections, then the flow you feel, the relentless forward motion, is not universal. It is local. It belongs to modes that change. Your body changes, your brain updates, your memories accumulate. That is why time feels real to you. But the universe at large may not be flowing in the same way. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is the passage of time fundamental, or is it a story told by complex systems like us? Light leans toward the second answer. It whispers that the universe might be static at a deeper level, with all events laid out, connected by paths that do not age. If that is true, then the future is not approaching and the past is not receding. They are already there, linked by geometry, waiting to be experienced by systems that move through them. Do not rush past that idea. Sit with it. If the universe is more like a completed structure than an unfolding drama, then our sense of becoming is a perspective, not a property. And light, timeless and unmoving, is the clearest clue we have. But here is where the mystery deepens again. If everything is laid out, why do we experience choice? Why does uncertainty feel real? Why does the future seem open? The answer does not lie in light alone. It lies in how information is processed by systems that live inside time. And that brings us to a delicate edge. Because once you start treating time as emergent and light as timeless, you are forced to rethink what information is, how it flows, and whether the universe computes its own or simply contains it. And to explore that properly, we need to slow down even further and ask what it really means for something to be known. When knowing itself takes time, but the connections that allow knowing to happen do not, and that tension right there is where the next layer of the story begins. Just as you start to notice that the simplest particle in the universe may be quietly revealing the limits of knowledge itself, not by moving through space, but by refusing to move through time at all, which naturally leads us to consider what happens when information tries to ride along something that never ages, something that never experiences before or after, something that only ever exists as a complete, indivisible connection between events. Let me slow everything down again. Information by its nature suggests sequence. A message is sent, then received. A question is asked, then answered. But light refuses to host that sequence internally. It does not carry a timestamp. It does not mark progress. So how does information ever get from here to there? The answer is subtle. Information does not live inside light. It lives at the endpoints. Light merely defines which endpoints can be related. Think of a written letter. The meaning is not in the envelope during transit. The meaning exists when the letter is written and when it is read. The envelope simply permits the relationship. Light is that envelope, except it does not travel in the way envelopes do. This reframes communication itself. Nothing is happening to the message, while light connects sender and receiver. All the happening occurs where time exists, not where it does not. Now, ask yourself something unsettling. If light does not age, then information carried by light does not age either. Yet, when it reaches us, it can be ancient. How can something timeless arrive old? The age belongs to the source and the receiver, not the connection. The message feels old because our clocks say so, but the connection itself is ageless. This helps explain why the universe can preserve patterns across enormous spans. The cosmic background light is not a tired traveler. It is a pristine link between early matter and present detectors. So perhaps the universe remembers not because things persist, but because connections remain valid. Now turn inward. Your own memories feel like something carried forward through time. But maybe memory works the same way, not by transporting the past, but by maintaining internal connections between states. If that is true, then light is not unique. It is just the cleanest example of a broader principle. Change happens at nodes, not along links. This principle challenges a deep assumption. We often imagine the universe as evolving moment by moment, with everything updating continuously, but light suggests a different picture. Events are laid out, relations exist, change is how we move them. Motion then becomes a property of observers, not of connections. Now consider velocity again. We define speed as distance over time. Light has a fixed speed because it defines the conversion between space and time. It is the ruler that keeps the geometry consistent. Trying to measure light speed is like trying to measure how many centimeters are in a centimeter. You can do it, but the result is built into the definition. This is why no matter how fast you move, light still behaves the same. You are changing your path through spacetime. Light is not adjusting to you. You are adjusting to the geometry. This brings us to a quiet realization. There is no universal now. Different observers slice spacetime differently into past, present, and future. Light respects none of these slices. It cuts across all of them equally. So when two observers disagree about timing, light is not confused. It is indifferent. This indifference is not ignorance. it is consistency. Light follows the deepest rules, not the surface narratives. Now imagine a universe where nothing moves faster than light, not as a restriction, but as a statement of structure. Faster than light would mean stepping outside the geometry. It would mean creating connections that bypass the rules that make time and distance meaningful. So the limit is not about speed, it is about coherence. This helps explain why the universe feels stable, why cause does not scramble, why effects do not precede causes in our experience. The geometry enforced by light-like connections keeps the story readable for beings who live in time. Now pause and notice how strange this is. Light, which we treat as a thing, is actually the guardian of order, not by acting, but by defining what action can mean. At this point, a natural question arises. If light does not move through time and matter does, what happens at the boundary? What happens when matter turns into light, or light into matter? At that boundary, time thins. Processes like emission and absorption are where timeless connections meet timeful systems. Those moments are where physics does its most delicate work. From the outside, we see a particle emit light and recoil. From the inside, there is no internal story for the light itself. The transaction is complete without a middle chapter. This suggests that what we call processes may actually be relationships viewed from within time. Let me offer another image. Imagine a book where all pages exist at once. The story only unfolds when someone reads it page by page. Light is like the binding. It holds the pages together, but does not read them. The reader experiences suspense. The binding does not. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a universe that may be fundamentally static, threaded with timeless connections, experienced dynamically by subsystems that move through those threads. This does not make experience illusory. It makes it perspectival. Your experience of time is real because your structure requires it. Light's lack of experience is real because it has no structure that could support one. This removes a hidden hierarchy. Light is not more fundamental because it is timeless. Matter is not less fundamental because it ages. They are different roles in the same structure. Now ask yourself something personal. If your sense of flow arises from how you process information, could that flow change? Could a different kind of mind experience the universe differently? Physics does not answer that directly, but light hints that time is not a single universal river. It is a pattern of currents shaped by connections. And if that is true, then understanding time means understanding information, not how fast it moves, but how it is arranged. This is where the story quietly turns. Because once you treat time as emergent and light as defining structure, you are led toward questions about entropy, memory, and why the past feels fixed, while the future feels open. Those questions cannot be answered by geometry alone. They require thinking about complexity, about records, about how systems store correlations. Light provides the canvas, matter paints the arrows. So the reason light does not move is not a trick of language. It is a signpost. It tells us that motion and flow are not universal features. They are local experiences embedded in a timeless framework. And once you see that, you begin to suspect that many puzzles we argue about are puzzles of perspective, not of reality itself. But perspective is powerful. It is what makes the universe feel alive. So the real mystery is not why light does not move, but why we do, why we feel carried forward, why each moment seems to replace the last, even though the structure that allows those moments to exist may already be complete. And to understand the tension, we have to look closely at how order arises from timeless connections, how memory carves direction into a symmetric landscape, and how the simplest unmoving link in the universe might be quietly shaping the most familiar feeling we have, the feeling that now is slipping into then, even as nothing fundamental is actually going anywhere at all. Which brings us naturally to the question of what exactly creates the arrow that light itself never follows, and whether that arrow is written into the universe or written by us as we trace our own path through a structure that has been there all along, waiting to be noticed, not in motion but in relation rather than motion. Let me approach this arrow carefully. We feel time pointing somewhere, past behind us, future ahead. Light feels none of this. So where does the arrow come from? The answer is not hidden in space-time itself. Space-time allows many directions equally well. The arrow comes from how information is arranged and preserved. Think about memory. Memory is not time stored. It is structure stored, a record, a pattern that persists. When a system can hold records, it distinguishes what has happened from what has not. Light does not hold records. It cannot remember. It cannot forget. It simply connects. Matter, on the other hand, can trap information. Atoms lock in configurations. Brains encode experiences. Rocks remember impacts. This accumulation of records creates asymmetry. Now ask a precise question. Why do records point toward the past and not the future? Because records are created by irreversible processes. Processes that scatter information in ways that cannot be perfectly undone. This scattering has a direction, not because the laws demand it, but because the universe began in a very special state. Let me be precise, without being technical. The early universe was simple, smooth, ordered. That simplicity made it possible for complexity to grow in one direction. As complexity grows, records form. As records form, an arrow appears. Light witnesses this growth, but does not participate in it. It links early simplicity to later complexity without changing itself. So when we say time flows, what we really mean is that records accumulate. Now consider this carefully. If all records were erased, would time still feel like it passes? Without memory, there is no sense of before. There is only experience without sequence. This is why the arrow of time is tied to memory and entropy, not to light. Entropy is often described as disorder, but that misses the point. Entropy is about how many ways a system can store information. As entropy increases, information spreads into more places. This spreading is what creates irreversibility. Once information is widely distributed, gathering it back becomes practically impossible. Light does not spread information internally. It has no internal degrees of freedom to scatter, so it carries no entropy of its own. This is why light can connect low entropy beginnings to high entropy endings without contradiction. Now notice something striking. The most timeless thing in the universe is also the most reliable messenger, because it does not age, it does not degrade. This is not a coincidence. It is a reflection of structure. Light preserves relationships exactly because it does not participate in the arrow. So when we look far away, we look back in time. But light itself is not traveling backward. It is simply revealing connections between different record-bearing systems. This again flips intuition. We are not seeing the past because light carries the past. We are seeing the past because our present contains records linked to earlier states. Light is the stitching that makes those records meaningful. Now let me ask a more delicate question. If the arrow of time comes from records and entropy, could it reverse? In principle, yes. In practice, no, because reversing it would require gathering scattered information with impossible precision. This tells us something important. The arrow of time is not a law, it is a condition. Light is neutral with respect to that condition. It works equally well in any direction. The equations do not care. Only we do. This explains why fundamental physics often looks time-symmetric, while experience does not. The symmetry lives in the connections. The asymmetry lives in the records. So when you imagine light as moving, you are importing your own arrow into something that does not have one. Now step back and observe the full picture emerging. The universe may be a fixed structure of events and connections. Light defines which events can be related. Matter defines which events are remembered. Experience is what it feels like to move through that structure while accumulating records. Seen this way, motion is not fundamental. Becoming is not universal. They are consequences of complexity. Light, in its stillness, exposes that truth. This does not diminish motion. It explains it. Now consider how radical this is. The thing we treat as the ultimate speed limit is actually outside speed entirely. The thing we use to define motion does not move. This is not paradoxical. It is clarifying. It suggests that the deepest layer of reality is relational, not dynamic. Dynamics emerge when relations are explored by systems capable of change. So the question shifts again, not why light does not move, but why some systems do. The answer lies in instability, in the fact that matter can change state, while space-time connections cannot. Matter rolls downhill through possibilities. It traces the shape of the hill. Now imagine removing all matter, no particles, no fields that can change, only space-time and its connections. Would anything happen? Probably not. There would be no arrow, no story, no experience, just structure. This is uncomfortable because we like to think the universe is doing something, but maybe doing is not fundamental. Doing requires change. Change requires systems that can change. Light does not. This leads to a final, quiet turn in perspective. Perhaps light is not special because it is fast, but because it is inert with respect to time. It is the reference against which all change is measured. This makes it less like a particle and more like a rule. And rules do not move. So when you next imagine a beam of light crossing space, try to let go of the image of a traveler. Imagine instead a fixed line in space-time connecting two moments that feel far apart only because you live inside one of them. The distance is yours. The waiting is yours. The light simply connects. And once you truly absorb that, you begin to see that many questions we ask about the universe assume a flow that may not exist at the deepest level. The deepest level may be timeless, complete, and still. We move within it. We feel the motion. We tell stories about it. Light does not. It stands at the boundary between what changes and what does not, quietly revealing that the arrow we follow is not written into space-time itself, but into the way information accumulates and persists within certain regions of it. Which means that if we want to understand why the universe feels alive rather than frozen, why moments seem to arrive and depart instead of simply coexist, we cannot look to light for the answer, but we must look to the structures that use light to build memories, to carve distinctions, to create histories. And once we do that, we are forced to confront an even stranger possibility, that what we call the present is not a fundamental feature at all, but a moving boundary defined by record-keeping systems like us, sliding across a timeless landscape of connections, a boundary that light itself never crosses, because from its perspective, there is nothing to cross, only a single indivisible relation that contains both what we call then and what we call now. And if that is true, then the question of why light does not move quietly transforms into a much deeper question about why anything ever seems to move at all, and whether the feeling of passage is something the universe generates, or something that emerges only when parts of the universe begin to ask questions about themselves. And that is where the next layer of the story begins. At the moment you start to suspect that time itself may be less like a river and more like a shadow cast by complexity onto a structure that never changes, even as you experience it changing, moment by moment, thought by thought, along a path that feels inevitable, but may only be a particular way of tracing what has always been there, waiting not to move but to be related.